Hello and welcome to this week's West Asia Post with me, Ghadi Francis, our weekly show where we bring you stories from the world's most volatile region. 2 weeks ago on the show, we told you about an alleged secret meeting between the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But it looks like the kingdom has changed tune. Recently, in a Bahrain summit, an influential Saudi prince strongly criticized Israel, a sharp departure from the kingdom's latest rhetoric. This week we will tell you how the Israel move is driving wedge between Riyadh's royals. Let's take a look.
The House of Saud, West Asia's most powerful family, a source of stability in the region. But now cracks are emerging between the royals. While one Saudi prince is bashing the Palestinian leadership, another influential member is criticizing Israel.
They profess that they want to be friends with Saudi Arabia. And yet, all Israeli governments are the last of the Western colonizing powers of the Middle East. From the time of the Balfour Declaration, they have forcibly evicted the inhabitants of Palestine after the 1948 war, as attested to by Israeli historians.
At the beginning of my remark, I would like
His statements came as a blow to Israel, a direct contrast to the kingdom's recent rhetoric. Talks of normalization now seemed like a distant dream. So what is going on in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? In 2017, Mohammed bin Salman rose to power in a midnight coup. King Salman chose MBS as the first in line to the throne, removing Mohammed bin Nayef. The maverick crown prince has since emerged as the de facto ruler, shaped key policies in Saudi Arabia and even courted some serious controversies. But the Israel move could be his biggest test so far. Turkey's commitments now tell the world that MBS does not hold the power in the kingdom. A prominent figure in the kingdom, Prince Turki is close to King Salman. The Saudi king has adhered to the traditional Saudi view in the past, a two-state solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, as the custodian of Islam's holy sites. King Salman seems to have no interest in this diplomatic move, one that could put the kingdom's leadership status in danger. MBS, on the other hand, has economic and strategic interests on his mind. His vision for 2030 hinges on economic independence, and a deal with Israel could bring in investments. Saudi Arabia's official position is that normalization with Israel must be part of a reciprocal process. This is a stance that carries great weight in the Arab world, but one that has witnessed a shift over the years. As the royal of Riyadh fight a public war, it looks like Israel will have to make do with secret meetings for now. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is one.
Like always, we will continue to bring you the latest updates from the heart of the conflict. But don't go anywhere, we have a lot more lined up for you in today's episode. But first, as usual, let's take a look at what else is making headlines across West Asia.
Israel-Morocco agree to normalize relations in a United States-brokered deal. Under the agreement, Morocco will establish full diplomatic relations and resume official contacts with Israel. US President Donald Trump instead has agreed to recognize Morocco's sovereignty over the Western Sahara. A United Nations-backed tribunal has sentenced Salim Jamil Ayyash to life imprisonment. The Hezbollah member was sentenced for his involvement in the 2005 assassination of former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Saudi Arabia has approved the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for use. Saudi Arabia has now become the second Gulf country after Bahrain to green-light the drug. The United States Senate backs a massive arms sale to the UAE after Trump's veto threat. The deal includes sale of $23 billion in advanced fighter jets and drones to the United Arab Emirates. India's Chief of Army Staff General MM Naravne met with the commander of the UAE's land forces and staff. discussing key issues of mutual interest and defense cooperation. General Naravne is on a 6-day tour of the UAE and Saudi Arabia, a first-ever visit by the head of the Indian Army to the two Gulf countries.
We have previously reported on the political, economic and social crisis in Lebanon, but it seems that the country is reaching a meltdown now. A tough decision of removing the subsidies will affect the poorest of the poor. And now the caretaker government is tossing it to the parliament. The parliament tosses it back to the government like a hot potato. But eventually a decision has to be made. How will it affect the Lebanese people? We tell you more in this exclusive ground report from the heart of Beirut. Lebanon's economy is on the verge of collapse. It has been a failure for decades now, and the crisis is getting out of hand. Officials are mulling over ending subsidies, a move that will deprive the poorest people in the country of their essentials: bread, medicine, and fuel. When we say Lebanon is in crisis, in danger of famine, people find it hard to believe. Because when you take a look at the streets of this downtown, the branded luxurious scenery, the sense of richesse, the booming nightlife, it is actually unbelievable. But this might be the root of the problem for Lebanon, the spending behavior. Just like some citizens might buy big TV screens that cost more than their salaries, the Lebanese government have been using subsidy to buy branded goods and support cartels. So what exactly is the problem? About $800 million are remaining in the central bank. The money will be used to support the import of essentials. A move that would buy time, maybe 2 to 4 months, depending on how the spending is organized. A decision must be made, but it will be an unpopular one. So the caretaker government passes the responsibility on to the parliament. The parliament instead asks the central government to decide. Meanwhile, the actual decision maker is the governor of the central bank, and the situation is as volatile as can ever be. This is Lebanese bread. The politicians and officials in Lebanon say that they will protect the price of this loaf, but the price of everything else will be doubled or multiplied by 5. And guess what? The studies show that the cartels, the businessmen who sell flour to these bakeries, were making extra profit because of the subsidy, and that removing the subsidy might actually decrease their profits. It is the absence of jurisdiction, of accountability, and political stability. But others see it as the end of Lebanon.
The main problem with just removing the subsidies without providing any alternative to them is that, one, as things currently stand, over 50%, around 55% of the Lebanese population is living under the poverty line. By removing subsidies on these, you will push even more and more people into impoverishment. So you start off with around 55% of people under the poverty line, you might end up with something around 70% under the poverty line. So it will exacerbate an already large social crisis. So there needs to be an alternative to the currently unsustainable subsidy scheme.
Okay, but you know, I'm not justifying, but there's another point of view in the country, especially among people who are talking, that removing the subsidies will just decrease the profits for the cartels, and the subsidies will remain on the real essentials, as in the bread and some medicine that is really critical, like the diabetes medicine or whatever. And I've heard today from some journalists, like they said, okay, we have subsidies for 4 kinds of medicine that are all paracetamol, for example. So this is why they called it making it more logical spending rather than actually removing the subsidy. Do you think that organizing this money left has any kind of positive outcome?
Okay, so there's no arguing that the subsidy system as they currently stand and as they have been for the last decades are not sustainable, and they're bad economics, simply said. This current subsidy system is a blanket subsidy that benefits all citizens irrespective of their economic and social status. And past evidence globally shows that blanket subsidies primarily go to those who need it the less. So actually those who need it the most are the least beneficiaries of the subsidy system. What you should replace subsidizing goods with is having a more comprehensive, means-tested social support or social safety net that supports that supports households who need support financially, rather than supporting the purchase of certain goods. So here we're talking about, okay, you have certain means testing, certain financial criteria and social criteria. And once people meet them, they're eligible for direct cash transfers. That are, here we're not talking about subsidizing certain goods, but providing direct cash transfers.
They mentioned it.
To households for which they have the liberty to spend the way they see fit. So that is what would normally be the case in most welfare states. In most social democracies and welfare states, you would have that. You would not have subsidies on goods. You would have a social support system for families who require social support.
Although it seems hopeless, it is not. Iraq has offered a good deal on crude oil, and this might help get through. Other countries and relief plans can also change the reality. But here I quote a holy saying that is really popular in West Asia. God does not change your reality until you change from within. So unless the Lebanese people and government change their spending behavior, the worst is yet to come. This year, the Israelis agreed on a coalition government to help deal with the pandemic. But as they stare at a third wave, Israel might be heading to polls again. For a record, 4th time in 2 years.
Voting. It's become a bit of a habit for Israelis. They visited the polling booths thrice. And things look ripe for a 4th trip as well now. The last election left us with 2 prime ministers, Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. The two agreed on a power-sharing deal to rotate the premiership after 18 months. But now the alliance is on the verge of collapse. Benny Gantz wants out, and he has already initiated the process. Gantz's main complaint? Netanyahu is sidelining his demands.
Netanyahu committed there will be no tricks and shakes. He committed. Netanyahu promised responsible management of the corona crisis. He promised. Netanyahu does not implement, and the public is paying the price. Netanyahu didn't lie to me, he lied to you.
And it's not just Gantz. The people of Israel also want Bibi out. Anti-Netanyahu protests have grown over the last few months, and people are slamming the government's pandemic response. But Bibi remains unfazed. Instead, he is accusing Gantz of violating their agreement.
Benny Gantz must pull the handbrake. He must stop the downhill spin to elections to halt the unhinged attacks on us. He needs to change his conduct. It's not too late yet.
This 4th election could be a 3-horse race. Bibi has a new challenger, a familiar face. A man who resigned from his own party and chose to go at it alone. Meet Gideon Sa'ar. He could emerge kingmaker in 2021. The two men have sparred before for Likud's leadership. Back then, Netanyahu came out on top. But this time around, Sa'ar has a better chance.
The order of the hour is to replace Netanyahu's longest-serving rule in the country's history.
Will this be the end of the road for Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister? Only time will tell. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
We are currently living in the middle of a pandemic, one that has killed over 1.5 million people around the world. Here in West Asia, countries are reeling under the pandemic. Healthcare systems are on the verge of collapse. Access to a vaccine seems unlikely. So why does the situation look so grim for the region? We tell you more.
Sanctions. West Asia has been dealing with it for decades. But in the era of a pandemic, sanctions are far more deadlier. And West Asian countries end up paying the price. Their healthcare systems are on the verge of a collapse, and there is no relief in sight. A tiny enclave under Israeli blockade since 2007, the Gaza Strip is home to 2 million people. 13 years of economic sanctions have ravaged its economy, leaving its dense population vulnerable to contagions. The pandemic is now overwhelming its medical system. Test kits and hospital beds are running out. Ventilators are occupied by COVID-19 patients, and lockdowns seem to be the only solution.
The Ministry of Health is experiencing an unprecedented situation because of the rising number in the active coronavirus cases in the Gaza Strip. The beds in the intensive care units are running out.
Shortage of medicines is also not helping the situation. After authorities announced that they could no longer conduct tests, the World Health Organization provided Gaza with around 20,000 test kits. But this will only last for a few days. And the Palestinian enclave needs vital aid. And sanctions are derailing funding efforts. The situation is no different in Iran. With more than 1 million COVID-19 cases, it is the worst affected country in West Asia. But crippling sanctions are hampering its pandemic response. US sanctions are hindering access to medicines and even a COVID-19 vaccine.
Our people should know that whatever we want to do, when we want to import medicine or import equipment or vaccines, we have to curse Trump 100 times as he has created so many problems and annoyances. A simple job that would normally be done with a phone call, a message or a swift transaction takes weeks or months to complete. And the whole country has to work together to transfer money from one place to the other just to buy medicine.
While the US insists that medicines are exempt from sanctions, restrictions have made trade difficult in the country. Even simple transactions to purchase medicines takes weeks. With Iran being cut off from international banking systems, surging infections mean a lockdown is the only viable option. But Iran's leadership has been wary of imposing restrictions. The sanctions have already led to a plunge in the country's currency. The price of basic goods are soaring every day, and a lockdown could further exacerbate an already dire crisis. With the sanctions likely to continue, both Iran and Gaza are fighting on two separate fronts. One to save the economy from sanctions, and the other to save lives from the virus. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
The festive season is right around the corner, but in the biblical town of Beit Lahem, the pandemic is dampening the Christmas cheer. Let's take a look.
This is the town of Bethlehem. Every year, thousands of tourists descend upon this Palestinian town. Celebrating Christmas at the biblical birthplace of Jesus Christ. Just 12 months ago, Bethlehem was celebrating its busiest festive season in 2 decades, with bright picture postcard scenes of tourists from around the world. But this festive season, a modern-day plague is keeping the visitors away.
Every year, the whole world looks towards Bethlehem because it is the birthplace of our Lord Jesus. Unfortunately, this year is different from all other years.
All across Bethlehem, hotels are closed. The shepherds are likely to be under lockdown. Restaurant tables remain unoccupied, with no tourists in sight. Bethlehem's economy relies heavily on the Christmas season, but this year, the biblical town is shaping up for a dismal festive season. In the Nativity Street, Mikhail Kanaweti's souvenir store is a popular stop for tourist coaches. He sells keychains engraved with images of Jesus or nativity scenes, made from Palestinian olive wood. But Kanaweti has not opened his shop in weeks. He is now struggling to pay employees' salaries.
Where the situation is heading, God knows, because I see no hope. I can't tell if the pandemic will be over next month or the month after. It is still unclear. We will reach a dead end in the near future and we will declare bankruptcy.
With restaurants, hotels and shops shuttered, residents say that they have never witnessed anything like this before.
I have worked in tourism for 30 years. We have had ups and downs because of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but never anything like this. The world used to stay open, but today we live in devastation. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict never affected our business like the pandemic, which is all over the world.
The revered tree lighting ceremony was also limited to 50 people. An almost empty manger square serving as a grim reminder of the pandemic.
For sure, this year's Lightning the Tree celebrations are not like before. This year, not many people attended because of the coronavirus pandemic. Bethlehem is sad in this festive season.
The West Bank is dealing with a spike in coronavirus infections, and Palestinian authorities are scrambling to contain the outbreak. A new nighttime lockdown has been imposed to help contain the virus, one that could be extended through Christmas and into the new year. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Iraq has discovered a new hobby, wind sports. Paragliding is becoming a rage among Iraqis, and more Iraqis every day are taking up flying. Let's take a look.
Hazem Amin inhaled deeply as he ran towards the edge of the cliff. His glider swept up smoothly, taking him above the mountains and quaint villages of the Kurdistan region. Iraq's Korak mountain has become a hotspot for paragliding. Located about 120 kilometers northeast of Erbil, it is now home to Iraq's newly found sport. The Erbil Air Club, founded in 2008, has more than 40 members. This includes trainers and solo jumpers.
Our love for this sport pushed us to establish this club. We first created a group and we started to establish the club, which took about a year, until the state gave us the license.
While traditional sports usually receive backing from the Iraqi state, the new activity of paragliding is fueled by passion. The founders pay out of their own pockets for 30 paragliders and safety gear. On weekends, cars can be seen driving up to a 2,000-meter plateau in the village of Ravanduz. They usually take off facing the west to catch the sunset. Most of the imported gliders are rainbow-colored, but one of them features the colors of the autonomous Kurdish flag. Red and green stripes on either side of a yellow sun. Erbil's Aero Club isn't the oldest one in Iraq, but it seems to be the most successful one. Better wind quality makes it a prime location for paragliding, while clubs have also opened in Duhok, Sulaimani and Halabja in the Kurdish autonomous region, but they are not as popular as the one in Erbil. However, what's catching everyone's attention is the growing number of women taking part in it. Rawez Mustafa is one of the 4 women who joined the club.
I have loved this sport since I was a little girl. I dreamt of it, of taking off into the sky and enjoying the beautiful views. Now my dream has come true, and I'm happy that I'm flying.
She now has 4 solo flights under her belt. With her dream coming true, Rawez now hopes for the club to accept more female members. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
That's all we have for you on this episode of the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, bringing you more stories from the world's most volatile region. Until then, stay home and stay safe. I am Ghadi Francis, and you are watching WION World is One.